The iron gate clanged shut behind me like a prison door, and I didn't flinch. Not when the cold wind bit through my thin jacket. Not when Marcus shouted after me, "See you in a month." Barnes, if you're not in jail by then, and not even when I heard Sarah laugh and say, or strung out under a bridge. I didn't turn around. I didn't give them anything. Because I knew the minute I looked back, I'd fall apart. Instead, I walked. The duffel bag on my shoulder was old, torn at the seam, and way too light to hold a future. Inside it, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a cracked phone with no service, and a faded photo of a woman I could barely remember, my grandmother. The woman who apparently hadn't been able to take me in when my mom overdosed 4 years ago. The woman who never came. I didn't blame her. Not really. That kind of blame rots you from the inside out. I'd seen it in the other kids' anger they wore like armor until it crushed them. Me, I didn't have armor. I had silence. The caseworker had called it aging out, like I was some milk past the expiration date. Mrs. Peters even tried to sound sympathetic when she handed me the manila folder labeled Independent Living Resources. Shelters, soup kitchens, phone numbers that wouldn't pick up after 5 p.m. She didn't hug me, didn't ask where I was going, just said, "Good luck, Elliot," in that hollow voice people use when they don't expect you to make it. And that was it. 18 years old, alone. Again. By the time the sun dropped behind the skeletal trees of late October, I was already 3 miles away from the foster home. My legs ached. My hands were numb. I hadn't eaten since the half-stale oatmeal at breakfast. But the fear didn't hit until it got dark. I sat on a bench near an old community center in a quiet part of Greenville. Kept my head down. Tried to look like a kid waiting for a ride. I wasn't sure where to go. I didn't know if the shelters had beds. I didn't know anything, really. Except one thing. There was no one coming. I dug through the manila folder again, hoping something new had magically appeared. 100 numbers. Cheap advice. A church that served spaghetti on Wednesdays. And then I saw it. Stuffed into the back of the folder, creased and almost torn in half, a business card. Patricia Goldstein, attorney at law, Charlotte, NC. In regard to the estate of Dorothy Barnes, please call. My breath hitched. Dorothy Barnes. My mother's mother. I stared at the name until the letters blurred. Dorothy Barnes. The woman in the photo. The only person besides my mom I'd ever been biologically related to. The woman who, as far as I knew, disappeared from my life before I could talk in full sentences. What could a lawyer want with me? She was dead. That was all I knew. I overheard a social worker mention it once offhand, like reading off a weather report. Grandmother passed last year, they said. No viable guardians left. I didn't get a funeral. Didn't get a goodbye. So why now? I read the card 3 more times. My stomach growled cruel and loud in the quiet night. For a second I thought about tossing it, getting up, heading to the nearest shelter like the system expected me to. But I didn't. I folded the card and shoved it deep into the inner pocket of my jacket just beneath the photo. 2 ghosts in 1 coat. That had to mean something. The next morning I used the bathroom at a 24-hour McDonald's to wash my face and brush my teeth. I looked like hell. Hollow cheeks, dirty hair, eyes that had seen too much for 18. I practiced a smile in the mirror. It didn't stick. I bought a $1 coffee and sat in the corner of the dining area waiting until 9 a.m. At exactly 9:01, I used the restaurant's phone and dialed the number on the card. I expected a recording, a receptionist. A "who is this?" Instead, I got her. Patricia Goldstein, Elliot Barnes, she said, as if she'd been waiting. I hesitated. Yeah, this is Patricia Goldstein. I've been trying to reach you for a few months now. You're a bit hard to find. I didn't say anything. I represent the estate of Dorothy Barnes, she continued gently. Your grandmother. She passed away 3 years ago, but her will was quite clear. She left everything to you. The words hit me like a punch. I think there's been a mistake, I said quietly. She didn't even know me. She knew enough, Patricia replied. She tried to get custody after your mother passed. The courts didn't allow it. But she left something behind. Something you might want to see. A pause. I'd like you to come to Charlotte, if you're willing. There's a house and land. It's all yours now. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on the bench again, holding the card in my hand, turning it over and over. A house, land, a woman I barely knew, trying to leave me something that mattered. It couldn't be real. Things like that didn't happen to kids like me. Kids who fall through cracks. Kids who learn to pack light because nothing lasts. But the card was still there in the morning. And for the first time in a long time I had somewhere to go. Lawyers don't chase nobodies unless somebody left them something. That thought wouldn't let go of me the entire 3-hour ride to Charlotte. The Greyhound bus was half empty. I took the window seat, pressed my forehead against the glass, and watched the Carolina trees blur into miles of highway. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Relief, excitement. Instead, I just felt numb. The silver key Patricia had mailed was looped through a shoestring and tied around my neck. It bumped against my chest with every turn the bus made cold and unfamiliar. I didn't take it off. There was something about the weight of it that felt important, like it belonged to someone who mattered. And maybe now it belonged to me. It still didn't make sense. Dorothy Barnes had been a ghost for most of my life. A name on a form, a face in a photo, a silent question in every therapist's file I'd ever read upside down during meetings they thought I wasn't paying attention to. Now apparently, she was the reason I was on my way to meet a lawyer in a glass building in uptown Charlotte with nothing but a duffel bag and a key. I didn't know if I believed it, but I knew I had to see it for myself. Patricia Goldstein's office was on the 14th floor of a building where people wore tailored coats and walked like they had somewhere better to be. I didn't fit in, could feel it in the stairs. My shoes were dirty. My hoodie had a hole in the sleeve. But the receptionist at the front desk didn't blink when I gave my name. Ms. Goldstein is expecting you, she said, polite but distant. Conference room 2, down the hall, first left. I knocked, not sure if I should just walk in. Patricia opened the door herself. She wasn't what I expected. Younger than I'd imagined, late 30s maybe. Blonde hair pulled back in a braid, black glasses that made her eyes look even sharper than they already were. But there was something kind in her voice, the kind of warmth that felt deliberate, like she knew how to speak softly to people who were used to flinching. Elliot, she said with a small smile. I'm glad you came. I nodded. Me too, I guess. We sat across from each other at a long oak table. She offered me water. I took it mostly because my mouth was dry as dust. Then she opened a thick folder and got right to it. Your grandmother, Dorothy Barnes, passed away just over 3 years ago. At the time, you were still in the foster care system, and unfortunately, there were complications with her attempt to gain custody. She tried. I interrupted before I could stop myself. Patricia looked up. Yes. She filed twice, actually. Once when your mother was hospitalized, and again after she passed away. But the court determined she was too old to be a suitable guardian. She was living alone in Caldwell County in her 80s and had some health issues. They denied both requests. My chest tightened. I'd never been told that. I'd spent 4 years thinking no one fought for me. No one wanted me. And all this time she did. She left behind a will. Patricia continued, her tone gentle now. Very specific. She named you her sole heir, her only living relative. I shook my head slowly. I don't have anyone else, no. And you were hard to locate, Elliot. You moved often. Group homes, temporary placements. We had to wait until you turned 18 to release the estate to you directly. What exactly is the estate? Patricia pulled out a printed list and a few photographs. She slid them across the table like puzzle pieces. The Barnes property, she said. Roughly 200 acres of farmland in Caldwell County, including a 2-story house, a barn, and a few outbuildings. There's also a small savings account, about $12,000, most of which was used to pay taxes and basic upkeep. The land has been leased to a neighbor for hay production to keep it active. I stared at the photos. A white house with peeling paint and a wide porch. A red barn faded by time. Trees, sky. So much space it made my chest ache just looking at it. This is mine. Patricia nodded. It is. And you have options. You could sell it. Based on the current market, it could bring somewhere between $600,000 and $750,000. Or you could lease it out again. Or you could live there. Fix it up. See what you want to do with it. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to do with any of it. She saw it. You don't have to decide right now, she said. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend it. What I do suggest is that you go see the property, spend some time there, get a feel for it. Sometimes the answers come after your feet touch the ground. She slid a small envelope toward me. Inside were 2 brass keys on a ring with a wooden tag. The address was burned into the wood. 19 Meadowbrook Road. I picked them up slowly, felt the weight again. Not just metal this time. Something heavier. She had this made the year your mother died, Patricia said quietly. I think she was hoping she'd get to hand them to you herself. I didn't cry. I wanted to. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded and said the only thing that felt honest. I want to see it. Good. Patricia said, her voice softening. It's about 2 hours northwest of here. Small town. Quiet. But people remember your grandmother fondly. You won't be invisible there, Elliot. I didn't know how to respond to that. I'd spent so long being invisible I wasn't sure I wanted to be seen. Do you have a place to stay tonight? Not really. She handed me a card. There's a bus station a few blocks away. I booked you a ticket to Caldwell County for tomorrow morning, and a room at the Millbrook Inn for 2 nights. It's modest, but clean. I'll cover the cost. Think of it as part of the estate. I looked at the card, then back at her. Why are you being so nice to me? Patricia smiled. Because your grandmother would have wanted someone to be. That night I walked the city for hours, clutching the key in my pocket, like it could disappear if I let go. When I finally curled up on a bench behind the bus station, I didn't sleep. My mind kept turning over the same question: what kind of woman leaves a house, land, and money to a grandson she barely got to know? What kind of love lasts through silence? In the morning, I'd find out. The bus ticket burned in my pocket like a challenge, and as I boarded the 9:15 to Caldwell County key around my neck, and the wind picking up around me, I whispered something I wasn't sure I believed yet. I'm not a nobody anymore. The door of the bus closed, the engine roared, and somewhere far off on a quiet road called Meadowbrook, a house waited with the porch light still on, just in case someone came home. If this is a dream, it's cruel, and if it's real, I don't know how to want it. The bus hissed to a stop in front of the Caldwell County Post Office, an old brick building with a crooked American flag out front and flower beds filled with wilting mums. There was no terminal, no announcements, just the driver turning his head back and saying, "Last stop, kid." I stepped off into the smell of pine and dust. Caldwell was smaller than I imagined. One long main street with a diner, a pharmacy, a bank, a hardware store, and a handful of sleepy locals eyeing me like I'd stepped off a spaceship. My boots hit the cracked pavement like they didn't belong here, and maybe they didn't. The paper tag on the key said 119 Meadowbrook Road, but there weren't any cabs or ride shares in sight. I was still deciding whether to walk the 4 miles or swallow my pride and ask for help when a voice behind me called out, "You look like you're looking for something or someone." I turned to see an older black man in denim overalls and a flannel shirt, gray stubble lining his jaw, eyes sharp under a weathered cap that said USMC. I gave him a cautious nod. "Depends who's asking." He chuckled. "Ray Holloway. I live off Orchard Hill Road. Used to help out on the Barnes place." My throat tightened. "Dorothy Barnes." He nodded slowly. "You her grandson?" I nodded back. "Well, I'll be damned," he said not unkindly. "She said you'd come one day. Told me if some skinny kid with her eyes and too much silence showed up to give him a ride and not ask too many questions." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. Ray just motioned to an old pickup truck parked nearby. "Come on, son. I'll take you up there. Place hasn't had footsteps in it since the day we buried her." I climbed into the passenger seat, clutching my duffel bag like it might jump out the window. The cab smelled like tobacco and old tools. We drove in silence for a while, the town fading behind us as the road narrowed into winding country. The trees here leaned in close, their leaves just starting to turn. Gold and rust and deep burgundy. Everything smelled like dry grass and old wood. "She left the house to me," I said after a few miles, voice low. "All of it." Ray nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "I know. She told me. You two were close, worked for her back in the day, helped with repairs, drove her to church when her knees got bad. We weren't blood, but she treated me like kin." I swallowed. "She ever talk about me?" He smiled softly. "More than you'd think. Had your pictures on her fridge, even the ones that weren't good. Said she couldn't get you out of the system, but she could make sure there'd be something waiting when you got out of it." I looked out the window, blinking fast. The silence in my chest felt heavier than usual. We turned onto a gravel road marked Meadowbrook. A rusted mailbox leaned sideways, the name Barnes faded but still readable. And then I saw it. The house stood like something out of a painting. 2 stories tall, white paint peeling in soft curls, a wide porch wrapping around the front. A porch swing hung on one end, chains creaking in the breeze. The red barn stood behind it, proud, and leaning roof like a shrug. Sheds and trees and space, so much space stretched out behind it. I couldn't breathe. "If this is a dream," I muttered, "it's cruel. And if it's real, I don't know how to want it." Ray didn't respond. He just parked the truck and got out like this was a place he knew in his bones. I followed every step, feeling like trespassing. Ray handed me a key. "Front and back door. Electricity's off. Water, too. I kept the grass cut and the mailbox empty, but otherwise she's just as she left it." I hesitated on the porch. The boards creaked beneath me but held. I fit the key into the lock. It turned smoother than I expected. The door opened with a sigh. The house smelled like dustwood and something floral. Maybe lavender. Maybe memory. The front room was filled with sheet-covered furniture, sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains. A stone fireplace stood against one wall, bookshelves flanking it still full. The floors groaned beneath my boots like the house was waking up. I moved slowly, peeling sheets off one piece at a time. A rocking chair. A coffee table with magazines from a decade ago. A lamp with a cracked shade. Everything felt frozen. Waiting. The kitchen was yellowed but homey. A ceramic rooster sat above the stove. The table had a checkered cloth still draped over it like someone meant to come back for breakfast. I climbed the stairs, hand-brushing the old banister. 4 bedrooms. One with a made bed and a neatly folded quilt. One that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. One full of storage. And the last I opened the last door and stopped. The room was small. A twin bed with a faded blue comforter. A wooden desk scratched from use. A shelf with dusty books, hatchet where the red fern grows Ender's Game. On the wall, a hand-painted mural of trees and wildflowers, clearly done by someone who cared more about meaning than skill. There was a photo on the nightstand. Me, maybe 7 years old. Sitting on a swing, I didn't remember holding a juice box, grinning with one tooth missing. I sat down on the bed. I didn't cry. Not yet. But it felt close. My whole chest hurt with the weight of it. She made this for me. A room, a space, a future that never got used. How do you grieve someone you never got to love? How do you thank someone who's already gone? A soft knock sounded at the doorframe. Ray. She started that room the week your mama passed, he said. Didn't stop working on it until her hands started shaking too bad to hold a brush. I nodded, throat too tight to speak. He handed me a ring of old keys. Barnshed mailbox. Figured you ought to have 'em now. I took them with shaking fingers. I'll be around if you need anything, Ray said. But I'll let you be for now. Lot to take in. He turned to go, then paused. Oh. Before I forget, Emily Vaughn runs the bookstore in town. Smart as hell. Used to read to your grandma every week. Said to tell you she's got something for you when you're ready. I nodded, standing in the middle of a room meant for a life that never started. After Ray left, I lay back on the bed, eyes on the cracked ceiling. The house creaked around me. Wind in the trees. The smell of dust and dried lavender. Tomorrow I'd go into town. Tomorrow I'd find out what else she left behind. But tonight I slept in the first room that had ever been mine. You're Dorothy's boy, Lord help you. You've got her eyes and her spine. The bell over the door jingled as I stepped into Vaughn's Books and Sundries. It was the only shop on Caldwell's Main Street with both a bookstore sign and an espresso machine. The smell hit first old paper cinnamon and something floral that reminded me of the soap in my grandmother's upstairs bathroom. I hadn't planned on coming here yet. But after a night alone in that house, I needed answers more than I needed time. Ray had mentioned Emily Vaughn, said she had something for me, and the way he said it, it didn't sound optional. The shop was narrow but deep with uneven wooden floors and mismatched chairs scattered between the shelves. A tall girl with short auburn hair stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, reading Beloved with one hand and eating a biscotti with the other. She looked up as I walked in. Her eyes narrowed, and before I could say a word, she pointed a biscotti crumb at me like a weapon. You must be Elliot Barnes. I blinked. Yeah, She nodded like she already knew and tossed her half-eaten snack onto a napkin. Well, hell, you're taller than I imagined. I had no idea how to respond to that, so I just stepped forward feeling awkward as hell. Ray said you might have something for me. She smirked. Straight to business. All right. You really are her grandson. You knew my grandmother, I asked. Knew her. She practically raised half this town by yelling at us until we got our act together. She was my debate coach in high school. Taught me how to argue without crying. That woman had the heart of a bear and the mouth of a preacher on Sunday. Emily reached under the counter and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with folded papers, and a small, hard-bound notebook tied with twine. She left these with me about 6 months before she passed, Emily said. Said if a certain skinny, stubborn boy ever showed up, I was to give them to him personally, and that I should tell him. She paused dramatically. You're Dorothy's boy. Lord help you. You've got her eyes and her spine. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stared down at the envelope as Emily slid it across the counter. Thanks, I said quietly. She leaned on the counter, studying me. You look like someone who's been in a lot of rooms where he wasn't wanted. I stiffened, unsure if it was a question or a statement. You're welcome here, she added softer. I figure someone ought to say it. I nodded, jaw tight. I appreciate it. She changed the subject with the grace of someone used to avoiding pain in public. So she said, folding her arms, what are you going to do with it? The farm, I asked. She nodded. I don't know yet. Still trying to figure out how real all this is. She tilted her head. Want some advice you didn't ask for? Sure. Don't sell it before you sleep there a week in a row. Walk the land. Touch the dirt. See if it says something back. I wasn't sure if she was being poetic or serious, but I tucked the thought away anyway. I sat on the porch that afternoon, with the envelope in my lap, unsure whether I was ready to open it. The late October sun filtered through the porch slats, casting long shadows on the boards. The key still hung around my neck. My boots were dusty from walking the edge of the fields. Finally, I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside, a will handwritten letters and the notebook. The letters were short. Some were to me, the most were just notes, reminders to herself about chores, bills, names of neighbors. But there were lines that caught in my throat. If he ever comes home, don't let him think I gave up on him. This house is his as much as it ever was mine. The notebook was something else entirely. Lined pages, careful handwriting. It wasn't just memories, it was a manual. She had written instructions, where the well pump was located, when to plant tomatoes, which neighbors were trustworthy, emergency contacts, sketches of the property with little X's marking toolshed keys, propane tanks, and where a fox liked to nest near the west fence. I flipped to the last page. One line in darker ink, you don't have to know how to do it all, just be stubborn enough to try. That's when I realized this wasn't a farewell. It was a welcome. The next morning, I took Emily's advice. I walked the entire property. The barn smelled of dry hay and sawdust with beams that groaned overhead like tired bones. There were still a few rusted tools leaning against the walls. A tractor covered in dust and spiderwebs sat in the back like it had been waiting for someone to ask it to work again. Behind the barn was an overgrown stretch of land that might have once been a garden. Rows of rotted stakes stuck up like forgotten grave markers. An old rain barrel leaned sideways, and further down the slope near the woods, I found what looked like the frame of a greenhouse, its glass shattered or missing entirely. There was too much to fix, too much to know, and yet, for the first time, I didn't want to run. As I circled back to the house, Ray was standing by his truck in the driveway, arms crossed. "You been walking the fence line?" he asked. "Trying to get a feel for it," I said. He nodded once. "That's a start." "I found the greenhouse," I added. He smiled. "Dorothy grew the best squash in the county in that thing, till a windstorm took half the roof off. I was thinking about rebuilding it." He looked at me for a long second. "You planning on staying?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I don't know yet, but I'm not ready to leave." He nodded like that was enough for now. "You need tools," he said. "I got some extras in the shed, and there's someone I want you to meet. Fella named Robert Chen. He leases the back acres for hay, knows the land, might be willing to help you figure it out." I hesitated. "I don't know the first thing about farming." "You think any of us were born with a plow in our hand," he said. "Show up, ask questions, get dirt under your nails. That's how you learn." I didn't respond, but I felt something settle in my chest. A beginning. That night I sat at the old kitchen table and opened the notebook again. I lit a candle because the power hadn't been turned back on yet. The flame flickered in the reflection of the kitchen window. My grandmother had trusted me with this place. Emily had welcomed me. Ray was offering help. And now there was a man named Robert Chen, who apparently had his hands in this soil long before me. Tomorrow I'd go meet him. Tonight I ran my hand over the grain of the wooden table and whispered aloud to the empty house, "I'm still here. If the system broke you, then build your own damn system." Robert Chen didn't look like any farmer I'd ever imagined. He wasn't wearing overalls or a cowboy hat. Instead, he stood beside a weathered pickup in a pressed button-up and work boots, arms tanned from the sun, salt and pepper hair tied back in a short ponytail. He had a clipboard in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, like someone who took his routines seriously and his mornings even more so. "You must be Elliot," he said, squinting in the morning sun. "Dorothy's boy." That phrase again. Dorothy's boy. I nodded and shook his hand. It was rough and strong, the kind of grip that came from years of turning soil and lifting heavy things. "She said you were smart," he said simply. "Didn't say anything about whether you could work." "Guess we'll find out," I replied. He smiled slightly. "That's the right answer." We stood in the middle of the south field, where the land sloped gently toward the tree line. The hay he'd been cutting for the past few years had been harvested last month, so the field looked tired, flat, and yellowed like it was waiting. "She used to call this patch the bread field," Robert said, "because it paid the taxes. Hay's not glamorous, but it sells steady, enough to keep the lights on. Barely." I listened as he talked about soil health, property lines, drainage market rates. Most of it felt like another language, but I kept nodding, asking questions when I could, writing everything down in a spiral notebook I'd found buried in a kitchen drawer. "I'm not trying to scare you off," he said after a while, "but this isn't romantic work. You won't get rich. Your back will hate you, and the weather will always win eventually." "I'm not looking to get rich," I said. He glanced at me sideways. "Then what are you looking for?" I didn't have a neat answer. I didn't even have a messy one. So I just said, "A place that doesn't disappear on me." Robert nodded once. "Good enough." He offered to extend the lease on the hayfield through next year, $500 a month, same terms as before, but with a twist, he'd teach me the basics. Soil testing, crop rotation, machinery upkeep. Nothing formal. No lectures. Just work. And if I showed up ready to learn, he'd show up ready to teach. I agreed before my fear could get a word in. Later that afternoon, I stood behind the house staring at the skeleton of the greenhouse. It was worse up close. Half the frame was still standing, but the roof was caved in. Most of the glass panes were shattered or missing. Ivy had started claiming the corners. A door hung sideways on its hinges, creaking every time the wind moved. But there was something about it, like a ruined cathedral waiting to be rebuilt. I took photos, measured what I could, wrote down what it might take to bring it back to life. Ray found me there, an hour later, hands on his hips, watching with that amused expression old men wear when they know more than they say. "She built that with her bare hands," he said, nodding at the frame. "Back when she still thought she'd grow enough to sell at the market." "What happened life," he said simply. "Your mom left town. Her knees got bad, and the helpers stopped showing up. She ever give up on it?" Ray shook his head. "She said if the system broke you, then build your own damn system. That's what this whole place was for her, a different system, one where she made the rules." I looked at the greenhouse again. Twisted metal, forgotten purpose. Maybe I could rebuild it. Maybe I couldn't. But maybe trying was the whole point. That night I sat on the porch with the notebook Dorothy had left me. I flipped to a page titled Greenhouse Dreams. She had lists of crops, sketches of shelving, and even notes about heating coils made from repurposed copper wire. She had dreamed in specifics. She hadn't just hoped, I realized she had planned. That kind of hope takes guts, and it felt like I owed her the same. The next day I hitched a ride into town with Ray and went to the hardware store. I had $200 left in my pocket. Not much, but enough to buy a hammer, gloves, some nails, and a measuring tape. It felt like claiming something, like permission. Emily spotted me walking back through Main Street, tools in hand, and waved me over to the bookstore. "Starting a construction company," she joked. "Greenhouse," I said. "Eventually." She lit up. "You rebuilding hers?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "That thing was her pride. She used to show me how to prune tomatoes in there when I was like 10. I thought it was magic." I smiled. She wrote down everything. It's like having a coach who left before the season started. "You need help," I hesitated. "You know how to build?" "No," she said without missing a beat, "but I know how to bring people together who do." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either, and judging by the look in her eyes, that was enough for her. That evening, as I was sorting through the mess inside the barn, I heard my phone buzz in the back pocket of my jeans. The burner phone Patricia gave me wasn't fancy, but it had voicemail. A message from a number I hadn't seen in a long time. I played it. "Elliot, it's Jenny. I know it's been a while. Look, I'm not asking for anything, but I didn't know who else to call. My aunt, she kicked me out. Again. I'm in Asheville right now. I don't know where to go. I remembered you said something about a farm." She paused. "I'm not asking for a rescue. I'm tired of being invisible. If you've got a couch or a floor, I'd be grateful." The message ended with a beep. I sat down on a hay bale, hands still wrapped around a pair of rusted pliers. Jenny. The one person from the group home who never treated me like trash. Who once shared her only pair of earbuds with me when I couldn't sleep through the noise. Who used to read out loud under her breath during lights out just so I could fall asleep to something soft. She was asking for help. And I had a roof, space. A bed in the room down the hall no one was using. I grabbed the phone and called her back. "Jenny," I said when she picked up, "come." There was silence on the line, then a choked sound like she'd been holding her breath. "You sure?" "Yeah," I said. "You've always seen me. I see you now." I gave her the address. told her to get there however she could. I'd cover the bus fare if she needed it. After I hung up, I looked around the barn. The old place still had room for second chances. And maybe, just maybe, I did too. You saved me once. Let me return the favor. This place looks like hell. Jenny arrived 2 days later, just before sunset, dragging a beat-up suitcase behind her and wearing 3 layers of clothes like she wasn't sure when she'd be warm again. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, uneven, like she'd cut it herself in a gas station bathroom. Her eyes, the same defiant gray I'd memorized years ago, looked like they hadn't slept much since we last talked. I met her at the bus stop in Caldwell, where she was the only passenger to get off. She stepped onto the sidewalk like she was expecting someone to laugh, or worse, not show up at all. Instead, I just said, "Hey." She dropped the suitcase and pulled me into a hug so fast I almost forgot how to breathe. "Don't make this weird," she muttered, chin digging into my shoulder. "I wasn't planning to," I said, my voice cracking. When she pulled back, she wiped at her face quickly and nodded like we'd just agreed to never talk about it again. We walked to the truck I'd borrowed from Ray. The engine was already running, heat blasting, and her hands hovered over the vents like she was thawing out from a lifetime. On the ride back to the farm, she didn't ask questions, just stared out the window, eyes wide at the trees and sky and space. "Feels like you drove me to another planet," she finally said. "Sometimes it feels like that to me, too." I pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped behind the barn. The porch light flickered on automatically, casting a soft yellow glow across the cracked steps and peeling white paint. Jenny stepped out of the truck, looked at the house, and whistled low under her breath. "You saved me once," she said, grabbing her suitcase. "Let me return the favor. This place looks like hell." I laughed for the first time in what felt like a week. I gave her the room across the hall from mine, the one that had belonged to my mother, I think. The wallpaper was faded, the bed creaked when you sat on it, and the closet still smelled like cedar and mothballs. But the sheets were clean, and the window faced the garden. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She dropped her bag and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "You really live here for now." Jenny sat on the bed and bounced once. "Better than any group home we've been in." "That's not a high bar." "Still," she said, "you did good, Barnes." Over the next few days, Jenny made herself at home like she was born for it. She reorganized the pantry, mopped the kitchen floor twice, and fixed a leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom using nothing but an old wrench and pure spite. She also burned the first 3 things she tried to cook, then nailed the 4th, and declared herself a culinary genius. "You didn't invite me here to sit around, right?" she said on the 3rd morning, spooning instant oatmeal into 2 mismatched mugs. "So tell me what you need." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect this fragile new rhythm we'd found. But the other part, the smarter part, knew she needed this as much as I did. "There's a garden out back," I said. "Or at least there used to be." "Say no more." She pulled on a pair of gloves we found in the barn and marched into the overgrown mess of what once fed this house. I followed her with a rake and a notebook, ready to write down everything I didn't know, which was almost everything. We spent hours out there, pulling weeds, marking what might be planting rows, digging up buried bricks and forgotten fencing. Jenny worked with quiet focus, breaking the silence every now and then, to point out something: worms, soil texture, sunlight, angles. I didn't know where she'd learned this stuff. I didn't ask. Some things didn't need to be explained. By the time the sun started sinking, we were filthy sore and oddly satisfied. A rectangle of land now looked like a place where something could grow again. "Guess this is what hope looks like," she said, brushing dirt off her knees. Messy and full of blisters, exactly. We sat on the back steps, passing a bottle of warm Gatorade between us, watching the sky turn orange. I thought about running again, she admitted quietly. When my aunt snapped, I almost did. But you didn't. She shook her head. Because I remembered this story you told me once back at St. Vincent's. About a place with trees and silence and a porch swing. I didn't know if it was real, but I hoped it was. It's real, I said. Yeah, she smiled. Now I know. Later that week, Emily stopped by the house with a bag of books and a box of leftover muffins from the shop. She raised an eyebrow when she saw Jenny covered in dirt hauling a broken trellis out of the garden. Making friends, she asked me. I nodded. She's staying a while. Emily handed me the muffins. Good. You need someone to keep you from becoming a complete hermit. Jenny poked her head around the corner. I like her already. The three of us ended up sitting on the porch trading stories about Caldwell, the house Dorothy, and what it meant to build something when all you'd ever known was how to survive. You know, Emily said halfway through her second muffin, there's a workshop in town next weekend. Sustainable farming for beginners. Hosted by the Chen family and a couple folks from the co-op. You two should come. Jenny looked at me. I looked at her. Why not? I said. That night, Jenny and I dragged 2 folding chairs onto the porch and stared at the stars in silence. No sirens. No shouting down the hall. No locks clicking behind staff members' backs. Just night air. Crickets. Wind in the trees. I still jump at shadows, she said. Me too. She leaned her head back. Think that ever goes away? I don't know, I said. But maybe if we stay still long enough, the shadows have to leave. She nodded, then yawned. Tomorrow I want to start drawing out planting beds. You said there's an old greenhouse right wrecked, but yeah. Good, she said. We're going to make it unwrecked. As she went inside to clean up, I stayed behind a little longer notebook in my lap. I flipped to the page I'd started earlier that day, Spring Garden Plan. Under it, I scribbled companion planting, rotation schedule, beets, tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, maybe a bench under the old dogwood tree, room for 1 more row if Jenny wants herbs. Then at the bottom I added, we're not just surviving anymore. I closed the notebook, leaned back in the creaking porch chair, and looked out at the dark shape of the barn, the silent greenhouse beyond it, and the stars overhead that didn't care if I deserved them or not. Because they were there anyway. And so were we. It's not ghosts I'm afraid of, it's what people leave behind. The first time I heard the attic door creak open by itself, I told myself it was the wind. Caldwell nights got loud, sometimes, owls, raccoons, distant barking, the groans of an old house settling into its bones. I'd gotten used to those sounds. I even liked them. They made the silence feel alive instead of empty. But this was different. It happened just after midnight. I was reading one of Dorothy's old gardening books in bed, half asleep, when I heard the slow, unmistakable sound, a hinge giving way, wood on wood, and then the soft echo of something shifting overhead. The attic. The one I hadn't dared go into since I moved in. At first I stayed still, holding my breath, like a kid hiding under covers. But then I heard it again, another soft creak, and the faint sound of something falling, something small. Jenny, asleep in the room across the hall, didn't stir. She was the kind of sleeper who could survive a thunderstorm without flinching. So I got up. Barefoot hoodie zipped up, flashlight in hand, I crept toward the attic stairs. They were narrow and steep, built long before building codes existed, with a pull-down ladder that screeched in protest when I tugged it loose. Cold air spilled out of the opening along with the smell of dust and wood long forgotten. I climbed up. The attic was bigger than I expected, with sloped beams and a single bulb hanging from a cord. The light switch didn't work, so I swept my flashlight slowly across the space. Boxes, stacks of them, an old trunk, a dusty mirror draped in yellowed cloth, and on the floor beneath the small window, a stack of papers that must have been what fell. I picked one up. It was a photograph, black and white, faded. My mother, young, probably 15, standing in front of the barn. Her hair pulled back. A boy beside her. Tall, lean, arms slung around her shoulders. I didn't recognize him. I picked up more. Letters, newspaper clippings, legal documents, things that had been tucked away like they were meant to stay buried. But I knew better now. Dorothy didn't bury things to hide them. She buried them because no one would listen. And now someone had to. Jenny found me the next morning at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, a pot of coffee gone cold, eyes bloodshot. "Did you sleep?" she asked. I shook my head. She slid into the seat across from me. "What is all this?" "History," I said. "And maybe a whole lot of trouble." I showed her the letters Dorothy had written to lawyers trying to get custody of my mom before she aged out of the system. Medical records, photos of visits that were never recorded. And then at the bottom of one folder, a small torn envelope addressed to S. Morrison Confidential. I handed it to Jenny. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning. "It's a report," she murmured, "from social services, about your mom, and some incident involving her and a foster home in Winston-Salem. The dates line up with when she got pregnant." My throat went dry. Was it? I couldn't finish the sentence. Jenny shook her head, eyes wide. "It doesn't name names. Just says the case was closed due to lack of evidence. But this..." She tapped the paper. "This suggests something bad happened, and someone covered it up." We sat in silence for a while, the air heavy between us. Jenny finally looked up. "You think that's what Dorothy was trying to fight? All these years?" I nodded. She wasn't just trying to protect me. She was trying to expose something. Jenny looked toward the ceiling. "So what now?" I stared down at the photo of my mom and the boy with his arm around her. "I think it's time to figure out who he is." Later that afternoon, I took the photo to Emily. She was behind the counter labeling a new stack of secondhand paperbacks when I walked in. "Elliot," she said, eyes flicking to the photograph in my hand, "you look like someone who's been hit by a train made of secrets." "Close," I said, handing her the picture. She studied it. "That's your mom, right?" "Yeah. But I don't know who the guy is." She squinted at the photo, then slowly nodded. "That's Sam Morrison." I froze. "Morrison?" "Yeah," she said, pulling out her phone. "He used to live here. His dad was a preacher. Real strict. Sam was one of those golden boys. Played football, worked at the feed store, disappeared right after graduation. Some people said he joined the military. Others said he ran off after knocking someone up." My heart pounded. "Do you know where he went?" Emily tapped her phone. "His sister still lives out near Riverbend. She teaches art classes at the rec center. Name's Carol now, Carol Jennings." I stood there unsure what to say. The world had just shifted again. "You okay?" Emily asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I think I just found the next piece." That night I sat on the back porch with Jenny. The stars were dim behind the clouds, and the air smelled like rain was thinking about visiting. I told her everything. About Sam, the photo, the report, the chance that someone in this town, someone still here, might have answers I wasn't ready to hear. She listened without interrupting, knees pulled up to her chest. When I finished, she said quietly, "You think he's your dad? I don't know what I think." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "It's not ghosts I'm afraid of. It's what people leave behind." I nodded. "Yeah, me too." We sat in silence after that. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that holds space for the weight of things. In the morning, I'd drive to Riverbend, find Carol Jennings, ask questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. But tonight, I sat under the soft creak of the porch swing, fingers curled around the photo of a boy and a girl, and wondered if everything I believed about who I was, who I wasn't, was about to break open. Maybe the attic hadn't just given me secrets. Maybe it had given me the beginning of a truth I'd never dared ask for. I spent my whole life trying to forget what your grandmother refused to let die. The Riverbend Community Arts Center was a repurposed church with stained glass windows that now filtered soft light onto canvases and pottery wheels instead of pews. Children's paintings lined the walls, sunflowers, stick figure families, and fields of impossible color. It smelled like clay tempera paint and old floor polish. I found Carol Jennings in Studio B teaching a watercolor class to 5 retirees who looked like they were more interested in the gossip than the painting. She was tall, graceful, maybe in her late 40s or early 50s, with silver-streaked hair tied back and paint on her jeans. She laughed easily until she saw the photo in my hand. Her face changed instantly. The smile dropped and something shuddered behind her eyes. "That picture," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. "Where did you get it?" "It was in the attic of my grandmother's house." Dorothy Barnes. Carol looked at me for a long moment. Then she stepped outside the studio, signaling for me to follow. We stood in the hallway, the sound of classical music drifting faintly from another room. She crossed her arms, leaned against the wall, and studied me. "You're Elliot," she said. I nodded. "You're her grandson." Was I said. "She passed last year." Carol looked away, jaw tightening. "I know." I held out the photo again. "That's your brother, right, Sam?" She took it carefully this time. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Yeah," she said after a long pause. "That's him. And your mother?" "Sarah Barnes." I waited. Carol sighed. "I spent my whole life trying to forget what your grandmother refused to let die." I stayed quiet, letting the weight of that sentence land. She looked at me then, not at the photo, but at me. "What do you want to know, everything?" We sat on a bench behind the building beneath a willow tree that shaded the back lot. She lit a cigarette even though a sign nearby clearly said not to. "Sam and Sarah were inseparable their senior year," she said. "Everyone knew it. Our father hated it, of course. She wasn't church-going enough, not from the right kind of family. But Sam didn't care. Did they talk about running away?" Carol nodded. "All the time. Said they were going to move to Nashville. He'd play guitar in a bar, she'd work in a bookstore. They were kids, but they were in love. I'll give them that. And then one day it just ended. Cold. My dad said Sam was being reckless, that he needed discipline structure. Shipped him off to some military-style rehab camp in South Carolina. Next thing I know, he's enlisted. Gone. You think your dad forced him out? I don't think. I know. And my mom, Carol, took a drag. Came by the house a few weeks later. Pregnant. Wanted to talk to Sam. My father slammed the door in her face. I felt my stomach turn. She tried to file a claim with social services, tried to get him on record. But with Sam gone and no support, she didn't have a chance. Then one day, she just stopped showing up. She was 15, I said quietly. I know. Carol flicked ash onto the ground. But my father didn't see a girl. He saw a threat. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to breathe through the storm brewing inside me. Carol looked up at me. Dorothy never stopped. She wrote letters, protested at the courthouse, tried to find Sam. I got so tired of it I blocked her number, told her to let it go. You knew I knew enough to feel guilty, but not enough to stand up to my father. I was just a kid too, Elliot. I didn't know how to fight him. Do you know where Sam is now? She nodded. Last I heard, he was living in Chattanooga, works at a repair shop, goes by Steve now. Steve, I repeated. He changed his name. Yeah, she said. He's been running for years. I stood slowly. Do you have his number? Carol hesitated, then reached into her pocket and scribbled on a scrap of paper. Don't expect too much. He doesn't like to talk about the past. I don't need him to talk, I said. I just need to see his face. Back at the farm, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the number. Jenny was on the porch working on raised beds and blasting music through an old speaker. I could hear her humming off-key between songs. I picked up the phone. It rang 4 times before a voice answered. Rough. Tired. Yeah, is this Sam Morrison? Long pause. Who's asking? My name's Elliot Barnes. Another pause. I think you might be my father. Silence. Not even breathing. I found a photo. Of you and my mom. Sarah. Dorothy was my grandmother. Dorothy, he said softly, like the word hurt. She's still alive. No, I said. She passed last year. Left me the farm. Another long silence. I'm not good at this, he finally said. Me neither. Why now? Because I've got questions that only you can answer. A beat. I don't know if I have answers, he said. But I can give you a place and a time. 3 days later, I drove to Chattanooga. The repair shop was tucked between a pawn shop and a donut place, paint peeling off the awning. I pulled up in Ray's truck, my hands sweating on the wheel. Inside, a man stood behind the counter, leaning over a cash register. Mid-50s, weathered face, same eyes as mine. He looked up as I entered. Stared. You came, he said, voice low. I nodded. I almost called it off. I almost didn't come. We stood like that, 2 strangers connected by blood and broken timelines, neither knowing what to say. Finally, he gestured to a small side room. Come on, he said. Let's talk somewhere that doesn't smell like oil. I followed him into the quiet and closed the door behind me. Outside, the wind kicked up dust in the parking lot, and somewhere a bell above a donut shop door jingled faintly. Inside, 2 chairs, a table, and a lifetime of silence ready to be broken. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I owe you the truth. The room smelled faintly of coffee grounds and motor oil, but the air between us was heavier than either. Sam, or Steve as the nameplate on his chest read, sat stiffly across from me at the small table. His eyes had lines at the corners, the kind people get from squinting against the sun or shutting out the past. I didn't know what to say. Every word I'd rehearsed in the truck had vanished. He broke the silence first. You look like her, he said. Your mom. People say I've got Dorothy's spine. He almost smiled. Yeah, that tracks. There was a silence that wasn't awkward. It was loaded, dense with the weight of things unsaid for too long. I guess we should start with what you want to know, he said. I want to know everything, I replied. Who you were to her, why you left, why no one believed her, why you didn't come back. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been stuck in his chest for 20 years. She was everything to me, he said. Your mom, Sarah. We were dumb kids, sure, but I wasn't pretending. I was in love with her. Real love, the kind that scared me, the kind that made me want to build something that could hold us both. What happened, my father, he said. He found out she was pregnant. I wanted to stay, marry her, be a dad. I even told Dorothy. She believed me. But my father, he didn't care what I wanted. He paused and rubbed his jaw like the memory still stung. He shipped me off to a boot camp for discipline, then threatened Dorothy. Told her if she kept pushing, he'd make sure Sarah lost the baby to the state. Said she wasn't stable, wasn't fit. Back then he had connections, church leaders, the county board, some judge he drank with on Fridays. I felt my fists clench under the table. I tried writing. They never got through. I sent letters to Sarah, to Dorothy, even to the school. I didn't know they were all getting intercepted. When I finally got back to town a year later, it was like the earth had swallowed her whole. No one would talk. My father told me she moved out, ran off with some guy. He burned her letters in front of me and said, "You're free now." And you believed him. He winced. No. But I didn't know how to find her. I was a kid, broke, scared. I left. Took a job fixing motors in Georgia, changed my name. I figured, maybe it was better that way. Safer. You had a son, I said. Did you know I guessed? I didn't know for sure. I told myself it wasn't real, that I'd only hurt him if I came back. The silence that followed was sharp. Finally, he looked up and met my eyes. You don't owe me forgiveness, he said, but I owe you the truth. I stared at him, this stranger who was somehow my blood, the man who had vanished and yet looked more like me than I wanted to admit. Dorothy fought for you, I said, for both of us. She never stopped. She was the strongest person I've ever met, he said, and I failed her. You failed all of us. He didn't argue, just nodded. We talked for hours. He told me about his years on the road, the jobs he took, the people he couldn't hold on to. He'd never married, never had another kid. He said he didn't feel like he deserved to. And I listened not because it made anything better, but because truth was its own kind of healing, even when it hurt. As the sun began to fade behind the shop windows, I stood. I don't know what comes next, I said. He looked at me with eyes tired but honest. Me neither. But if you ever want to come see the farm, it's there. He nodded slowly. One day. I walked out into the cooling Tennessee evening. A strange weight lifted, not gone but shifted. Now I wasn't dragging it alone. Back in Caldwell, Jenny was waiting on the porch when I pulled up. She stood as I got out of the truck, arms crossed. So she asked. He didn't lie, I said. Not to me. Not this time. She didn't say anything, just stepped forward and hugged me hard and fast like she always did. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table and I told her everything again. She listened without questions, just nods, her presence grounding. You gonna invite him here, she asked. I already did. And if he comes, I'll deal with that when it happens. Jenny leaned back, eyes scanning the kitchen. This house is getting full of ghosts. It's not ghosts I'm afraid of, I said. It's what people leave behind. She nodded like she understood too well. Then maybe it's time we decide what we want to leave behind instead. The next day we got back to work. The greenhouse was slowly taking shape. The frame had been reinforced with salvaged wood from the barn, and Emily had put out a call for volunteers. 3 high schoolers showed up with hammers and uncertain grins, and Jenny immediately handed out instructions like she was born to lead. Robert Chen arrived with spare nails and a 6-pack of root beer. He looked at me like I'd grown a new limb when I told him what I'd found. "Some roots run deeper than we know," he said, "but they still hold the tree steady." Emily set up a folding table with lemonade and cookies, and by noon, the greenhouse didn't look like a ruin anymore. It looked like a promise. People came and went. Kids drew chalk art on the porch. One older woman said she remembered Dorothy selling tomatoes at the market back in '93. She cried when she saw the raised beds. This house, she said, was a refuge for people who didn't have one. And now I thought maybe it could be again. That night I stood in the doorway of the greenhouse, the scent of fresh wood and soil thick in the air. Jenny joined me, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. "You ever think about how weird this is?" she asked. "Us here every day." She bumped my shoulder. "We built something today." "Yeah," I said. "We really did." She looked out at the stars, the field, the dark outline of the barn. "You think he'll show up?" I knew who she meant. "I don't know," I said. "But if he does, I want him to see what we made." Jenny smiled softly. "Not what he missed," she said. "What we made. Exactly." And for the first time, I believed it. This wasn't just about the pain that built us. It was about the home we were building in spite of it. You can't bury the truth just because it's uncomfortable. It has roots. The letter arrived folded into thirds, tucked inside an unmarked envelope with no return address. It was sitting in the mailbox on a cold Wednesday morning, hidden beneath a stack of local coupons and a flyer for a tractor auction. I didn't open it right away. I held it, felt the thickness of the paper, the careful way it had been sealed. My name, Elliot Barnes, written in block letters on the front. No stamp. Whoever left it had done so in person. Jenny noticed it as soon as I came in. "You look like you just saw a ghost," she said, pouring coffee into a chipped blue mug. "Close." I set the envelope on the table. This was in the mailbox. No name. No stamp. She sat leaning over to read it. "You gonna open it eventually?" She stared at me. "You're acting like it might explode." "Feels like it already did." In my stomach. Jenny slid it toward me, her eyes steady. "Do it." I peeled it open slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a single sheet typed, signed at the bottom in pen. Sam Morrison. The first line read, "I didn't want to write this, but you deserve to know what was done to your mother." I read the letter twice, then a third time. Jenny didn't ask anything, not right away. She knew the look in my eyes meant I was somewhere else, somewhere harder. When I finally looked up, I handed it to her. She read it quietly, her fingers tightening around the paper with every line. It wasn't just confirmation. It was confession. Sam hadn't just been silenced by his father. He'd been threatened, manipulated, watched. His father, Pastor Morrison, had used his church to bury evidence, pressure social workers, and erase the scandal from public view. When Sarah tried to report the abuse, she was labeled unstable. When Dorothy protested, she was painted as a bitter, overreaching woman trying to stir up trouble in a godly man's home. And the system let him do it. "He was a predator," Jenny said, voice low, "and they let him hide behind a pulpit." I nodded. My throat hurt. My hands felt numb. He said the records are still out there, I murmured. Buried in a county archive. Sealed but not gone. You thinking what I'm thinking? That if no one ever opens the box, nothing changes. Jenny stood and walked to the window, staring out at the barn. You gonna dig it up? I don't want revenge, I said. But I want the truth to have a name. A face. A place to stand. She turned. You can't bury the truth just because it's uncomfortable, it has roots. That weekend I drove to the Forsyth County Records Office. I'd called ahead, used Dorothy's old case numbers, and filed a Freedom of Information request. The clerk, a woman named Lee, looked at me like I was reaching back through a grave. These files were sealed in '97, she said, under pressure from some higher-ups. You know we don't usually unseal things unless there's a legal petition. I'm not here to sue, I said. Just to see. She studied me, then nodded once. I'll need an hour. I waited in a sterile lobby with flickering fluorescent lights and old farming magazines from 5 years ago. When she came back, she was carrying a cardboard box. Inside were manila folders, records stamped confidential in red ink, and reports I'd never known existed, statements from teachers, nurses, even an anonymous letter that matched Dorothy's handwriting. Jenny had been right. The truth had roots. And they were all still here, tangled and patient, waiting to be unearthed. Back at the farm, I laid the documents out across the dining room table. Jenny and Emily sat across from me, flipping through the pages with equal parts anger and awe. This is enough for an article, Emily said. Or a book. I don't want fame, I said. I just want light. Emily nodded. Then let's make sure it shines. She reached for her bag and pulled out a recorder. I can help you tell it right. No drama, no sensational headlines. Just facts. And a name, Jenny added. Pastor Henry Morrison. Emily looked at me carefully. You okay with that? No, I said. But I'm doing it anyway. The article went live 2 weeks later, published in the Caldwell Tribune, and then picked up by a regional outlet. It was titled, Sealed Truths, The Buried History of One Woman's Fight for Justice. The response was immediate. Some people called it brave. Others called it blasphemy. But it started a conversation that had long been frozen in whispers. 2 other women reached out anonymously, saying they'd had similar experiences with Henry Morrison back in the day. A former social worker wrote a letter to the editor admitting she'd been pressured to change a report. And one night, well past midnight, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. I'm sorry I didn't believe your grandmother. I should have. I didn't reply. Some apologies are just meant to echo. One morning, Robert showed up with a new sign for the greenhouse, hand-carved from cedar. Burned into the wood were the words, Dorothy's Roots. She earned it, he said simply. I mounted it above the door myself, hands steady, heart full. The greenhouse wasn't finished, but it was growing. We had tomatoes climbing the frames now, herbs sprouting in neat rows, and sunflower seeds in starter pots that Jenny talked to when no one was looking. The farm, this land, it didn't just hold pain anymore. It held truth and growth and the promise that the next chapter wouldn't be silent. That evening, Sam called. I saw the article, he said. You said what I couldn't. You gave me the pieces. I just put them in the light. There was a pause. I want to come see the farm, he said. If that's still okay. It is. And it was. As the sun set behind the barn that night, Jenny and I sat on the porch. swing her feet bare, a glass of sweet tea in her hand. "You think this changes anything?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "It already has." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Then maybe we're doing something right." I looked out at the garden, at the newly hung sign, at the house that refused to crumble even under the weight of buried history. We didn't just uncover what was hidden, we reclaimed it. And with every seed we planted, we reminded the land and ourselves that truth doesn't rot in the dark. It waits, and when it blooms, it's stronger than anyone expects. I didn't come back to be your father. I came back because I finally learned how to stand beside the truth. The morning Sam arrived, the sky threatened rain. Thick clouds rolled over the hills, turning the light silvery and soft. Jenny stood by the kitchen window with her second cup of coffee, watching the gravel road like it might give us a warning. "He's really coming," she said. I nodded, tightening the screws on the new hinge I'd just installed on the screen door. Said noon. She glanced at the clock. 11:52. "Got any snacks, or do we just greet him with trauma and tomatoes?" I laughed, but my stomach was tight. I was thinking we offer both. At 12:03, a black truck rolled into the driveway. Sam stepped out slowly, like the place held memories in the dirt. He wore jeans, a collared shirt, and boots that had seen more than one oil change. He looked older than he did 2 weeks ago, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I met him halfway across the yard. Jenny hung back by the porch, arms crossed, watchful. "Place looks good," Sam said. "We've been working on it." He nodded toward the greenhouse. "Saw the article. Saw the sign. Dorothy's roots. She'd like that." "I hope so." There was a long silence. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with the weight of things you don't know how to say first. Then Sam said, "I didn't come back to be your father. I came back because I finally learned how to stand beside the truth." I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and gestured toward the porch. "Come see it." We walked the property slowly. I showed him the garden beds, the greenhouse, the spot near the old dogwood where we planned to build benches this fall. He didn't say much, just nodded, sometimes smiled. His hands kept brushing the tops of plants like he was trying to memorize the shape of life returning. Inside the house, I gave him the same tour Dorothy had once given me. Kitchen pantry, the small sunroom that still smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. He stopped in front of a photo hung near the hallway, one of Dorothy holding baby me on the porch swing. "She always said you were her second chance," he murmured. "She was mine." When we got to the attic stairs, I hesitated. "You don't have to go up there," I said. He looked at me. "I think I do." So we climbed. The attic hadn't changed much. The dust had settled again, the boxes still piled in corners. But something about the air felt lighter now, like the house had exhaled. Sam stepped carefully, pausing at the trunk where we'd found the letters. He opened it slowly, pulled out a file folder labeled in Dorothy's careful handwriting, "For Elliot when he's ready." "I wasn't," I said softly. He glanced at me. Neither was I. He held the folder for a moment, then tucked it under his arm and looked around. "She built this place like a fortress, not to keep people out, to protect the truth inside." And now I asked. "Now it's open," he said, "like it should have been all along." We had lunch on the porch. Jenny eventually joined us, offering iced tea and biting sarcasm in equal measure. Sam took it in stride. "So you're the backup muscle around here?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "I'm the one who keeps him from setting the barn on fire." I smiled into my sandwich. It was the first time the three of us had shared a moment that felt normal. Not haunted, not loaded, just a meal. Afterward, Sam asked if he could visit Sarah's grave. I figured it out, he said. Went through records. Cemetery in Winston-Salem. Private plot. She was buried next to Dorothy's first husband. I've been once, I said. Didn't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied. Just show up. That's the hardest part anyway. Jenny watched us quietly. When Sam stood to leave, she walked him to the truck. You don't get a pass, she said, voice low. I'm not asking for one. But you showed up. Only thing I know how to do now, he said. She nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the house. He opened the truck door, then looked back at me. This place, he started. It doesn't just carry her legacy. It carries yours now, too. I'm not sure I want that. That's the thing about legacy, he said. You don't choose it, but you decide what you do with it. That evening, the rain finally came. Not a storm, just a steady, soaking kind of rain that made the earth smell alive. Jenny and I sat in the greenhouse with the windows cracked, letting the scent of mint and basil mix with the rain. She tapped her fingers on her knee. You think he'll come back? I don't know. I kind of hope he does. I looked at her. Really, yeah, she said. You need more than ghosts, even if it's just once in a while. We listened to the rain for a while. I think I get it now, I said. What Dorothy was trying to teach me all those years. Why she kept records. Why she didn't let the story die. Jenny turned to me curious. She wasn't trying to protect the past, I said. She was trying to make sure the future had better soil. Jenny smiled, resting her head against the glass. And now it does. I sat at the kitchen table that night, the file Sam had brought beside me. I didn't open it. Not yet. But I kept my hand on it as I wrote in my notebook. Today the house felt full. Not crowded full. The ghosts didn't leave. They just stepped back and let the light in. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting to survive. I felt like I was beginning something. Something real. Something rooted. Maybe even something permanent. I closed the notebook, then stood, and walked out to the porch, letting the screen door slam behind me. The rain had stopped and the sky was clearing, stars beginning to blink awake. Out by the greenhouse, the wooden sign caught a sliver of moonlight. Dorothy's roots. Not just hers anymore. Ours. Fall came slowly to Caldwell. The kind of fall that didn't rush, just eased in one red leaf at a time. Mornings turned crisp. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The sky changed color too, as if softening its light for the coming quiet. The farm, for the first time in years, didn't feel abandoned. It felt alive. Jenny and I stood under the oak tree one Saturday morning, watching a group of local kids plant bulbs near the greenhouse. It had taken months, but the land was starting to give again. Not just in vegetables or herbs, but in something deeper. A sense of hope, maybe. Of belonging. You realize, Jenny said, brushing dirt from her hands. You're officially the weird local guy with the farm now. Is that who I am? Yep, she grinned. Mysterious. Slightly haunted. Soft spot for tomatoes. I'll take it. We walked back toward the house, stepping around a line of straw bales waiting to be used in the fall festival we were somehow now hosting. When I asked how that had happened, Emily said, You opened your doors. What did you think was going to come through? The answer, it turned out, was everyone. Retired teachers, teenagers looking for community service hours, single moms who just wanted a safe place for their kids to dig in the dirt. They all came. Some stayed. Some just needed a quiet moment on the porch swing before they went home a little lighter. It wasn't what I thought I was building. It was better. Sam came back once a month. He never stayed long. Just long enough to help fix something or drop off tools. He didn't try to be my father, and I didn't ask him to. But we found a rhythm, shared silence, a few hard conversations, the occasional memory. Sometimes he'd sit by the greenhouse and talk with Jenny about engines or music, and other times we'd walk the perimeter of the property, saying nothing at all. It was enough. One day I caught him standing in front of Dorothy's old rocking chair, just staring. She would have made me clean the windows, he said. She made me clean them twice. He chuckled. That sounds about right. Then he added, I still don't think I deserve any of this. I looked at him. Maybe not. But neither did Dorothy. And she showed up anyway. He nodded. Showing up. That's the hardest part, isn't it? Yeah. But it's the beginning of everything. That winter we hosted a community dinner in the barn. It was simple. Folding tables, string lights, homemade soup. Emily printed out little cards with quotes from Dorothy's notebooks, things she'd written in the margins of seed catalogs or scraps of bills. One said, truth like a garden can be wild and messy, but it still grows something good if you let it breathe. People read the cards aloud. Some cried. A few laughed. Everyone left with full plates and warmer hearts. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. I wasn't just living in Dorothy's house. I was continuing her work. She didn't fight to change the past. She fought so the next generation wouldn't have to carry the same weight in silence. I opened the folder from the attic on New Year's Eve. I was alone. The snow was coming down soft and steady, and the world outside felt hushed. Inside the folder were letters I hadn't seen. One addressed to me, written in Dorothy's looping script. It was dated a month before she died. Elliot, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if I know you at all, you're doing something stubborn and brave with this land. I didn't always do things right. I held on to anger longer than I should have. I pushed people away. But I never gave up on you, or on the truth. This house isn't perfect. Neither is this family. But it's yours now. The good, the bad, and everything in between. Just promise me one thing: plant something every year. Even if it fails, even if it breaks your heart. Just plant. Because planting is a kind of faith. Love, Dorothy. I folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because the sadness didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean, like rain after smoke. Spring returned. The greenhouse buzzed with life again, volunteers, seedlings, music playing low from Jenny's Bluetooth speaker. The barn had been repainted. The porch swing oiled. A new raised bed had been built just for kids to dig and grow their own vegetables. One afternoon, I found myself talking to a boy named Marcus, 11 years old, quiet, liked cucumbers and didn't trust adults. You really live here? He asked, skeptical. Sure do. All by yourself? No, I said, smiling at Jenny nearby. Not anymore. He nodded like that made sense. He looked at the big oak tree in the yard, the one we'd strung lights through for summer nights. Feels safe here, he said. I felt something settle in my chest at that. Yeah, I said. That's the goal. That night, Jenny and I sat outside, legs stretched across the porch rail, sipping lemonade. Think we're done yet? She asked. With what? With fixing the past. I shook my head. You never really finished that. Yeah, she said, but you can stop letting it decide everything. We were quiet for a while. Then I said, you know what the real miracle is? What that? A story full of pain, loss, and silence somehow led to this. She looked around. The soft hum of the night, the lights in the barn, laughter from a couple down the road walking their dog. This is a good ending, she said. No, I replied. This is a beginning. The farm didn't become famous. It didn't make headlines. But it became something more important. A place where truth had room to grow. Where stories weren't buried, they were shared. Where healing didn't come in grand declarations, but in quiet mornings and seeds planted in people showing up even when it was hard. That's the story we built. And it's still growing.